Blog Talk Radio.
Alternative facts.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. At 12:07 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, numerous unidentified objects of unknown intent and unknown origin were detected at high altitudes over multiple locations of Earth's outer space by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and these objects are presumed to be some form of controlled aircraft. It is not known if more of these aircraft will arrive, or if they will attempt entering Earth's atmosphere. United States citizens are encouraged to monitor local media outlets, as more updates will follow as information becomes available. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country. The dead are rising from their graves and are attacking the human race. At this time, it is expected that more attacks of this nature will occur in several other states in the next few hours. The intent behind their attack is unknown at this time. It has been observed that a bite or exchange of fluids is a method of transmission. This is an extremely dangerous situation if they crave the taste of human flesh. It is not known whether this event will last for hours, days, or even longer. Stay calm, as authorities have been dispatched to deal with these creatures. An all-clear siren will be sounded when this situation is under control. Pacific Standard Time, nor is detected a long-range nuclear missile launcher. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of all residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host, Rodney the Viking Shortridge. I want to give a big old shout out to the Facebook paranormal groups that allow us to post our shows on their pages and helping us to get the word out about all of our guests. If anyone would like to speak to Black Diamond Paranormal Society, BDPS, to discuss your paranormal questions or issues, go to our website at blackdiamondps.org or email blackdiamondps@yahoo.com. As always, our services are free.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by calling 516-387-1922, or you can go to the Vibe Radio Network website at blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. For deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight. First off, I'd like to give a shout out to my cousins up in Ohio. Jennifer and Joe Shortridge of 222 Paranormal. You get a chance, check out their talk show. You can find them on Facebook under 222 Paranormal. Well, howdy, everybody. Hope everybody's enjoying this weird winter that we're having. Last week we got flooded. Now we got a little snow today. And warm temperatures, cold temperatures. It's weird, man. Very weird, very weird. But anyway, sorry about the little delay. Had a little techno problem, but I fixed it really quick. Sometimes it takes me, I don't know, a week or two, but I actually got that one quick. So enough of me sitting shooting shit with you. Let me go ahead and get to our guest. Tonight, our special guest is author, musician, and husband, Joshua Cutchin. And he's authored 3 books. And apparently he worked at the University of Georgia, Hugh Hodgson's School of Music for 3 years. So we're going to delve in because I think this boy's got a lot going on as far as UFOs, Bigfoot, and paranormal. So let's see what we can get going here. Let me click him over here. Hello, Joshua. Thank you for joining our show, and thank you for coming on. It's an honor to have you on, but.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, and 2 things right off the bat. Number one, you get a lot of bonus points for pronouncing my name properly. That doesn't always happen. and 2, thank you so much for your patience with me. For those of you who are listening and not sort of privy to the details, we had to reschedule from a couple of months back because my life is a never-ending stream of insanity. I have 2 one-year-old twins that take up a lot of my time and energy these days.
Oh, gosh. I got 4 kids, but they've all grown, and I got 5 grandkids. But I having twins, that was one thing I was always scared of. Please don't have twins. It's bad enough having one baby, unless 2 at a time. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, it comes with its own set of challenges. Let's put it that way.
Oh, I admire all you parents out there that have the twins and you're able to go through all of that because, like I said, one like to bore me out. I can imagine 2.
Well, you find ways to cope, I guess. That's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, it'd be like tag teaming. Let's get Mama and Papa in here, too.
Oh, yeah. There's definitely a lot of that.
Well, Joshua, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and, what led you down the path, that got you into music and writing and also into the paranormal world?
Oh, geez. Well, as far as the music thing goes, my sister was in color guard in high school marching band, and I really saw the sense of community and fun that came out of that, and I sort of wanted to be a part of it. So I was sort of, hemming and hawing on which instrument I should choose, and it was either going to be trombone or tuba because the trombone looked fun. You get to wear the tuba, and a friend of mine chose the trombone, and my band director leaped on me as playing tuba because not only was I that tall and big guy so I could be able to carry it, but also he just needed tuba players. It's a never-ending story. So it just sort of fell in my lap like that, and once that bug bites you, you live with the sting. So I ended up just sort of following that all the way through my collegiate career, and interestingly enough, even though I always got lots of good feedback from placing in different honor bands and doing well. I did well at it, but all my other teachers that weren't my band director had always encouraged me to go into writing. So I ended up after getting a master's degree in music, got a master's degree in journalism with the idea that maybe I would write about music, and I tried that for a while, and it's just, I just jumped from one sinking ship to another, music to the journalism industry. But that did allow me to secure a job at the University of Georgia, and I'm very thankful for my time there. I worked as sort of a public relations director, writing a lot of press releases for the school and doing a lot of graphic design. But after some time, I decided that in terms of the commute that I had and the wages, it just made more sense to to work less for a better hourly rate and do something that I really enjoyed. So I started doing freelancing in the Atlanta area, which I still do today. It'll be 5 years this May since I quit my job at the University of Georgia, and on top of that, I was obviously looking for some sort of outlet to keep on writing as well, because that's another passion of mine. I had an interest in stuff like Bigfoot and less UFOs, but a lot of the cryptozoology stuff since a really young age. I would always go to the library and grab a book on Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, or something along those lines. And for some reason, a long time ago, I had heard this bit of fairy folklore that if you ate food in the fairy realm, you would be trapped with the fairies forever. And for some reason, that little bit of folklore always stuck in my head. So flash forward to actually the year before I quit my job. So I was still working at UGA, and I was looking for a project, and I had gotten a gift card for Amazon from my sister-in-law, and with it I bought J. Robert Alley's Raincoat Sasquatch, which is an absolutely great book. I really recommend anybody who's interested in the subject of Bigfoot or Sasquatch to pick it up, because it's really, really wonderful collection of stories from the southern coast of Alaska. And I was reading through it, and I found this interesting bit of folklore in one of the tribes up there who believed that if you took food from the Bequas, which is their one of their Sasquatch analogs, you would be trapped with the Bequas forever. And I said, that's interesting. That really parallels the the fairy folklore. So that's interesting. I wonder if this is a theme that continues throughout other aspects of the unknown. And I said, well, maybe somebody will write that somewhere sometime. Nick Redfern will do it. Sure, he'll do it at some point, because he cranks stuff out so quickly. But I sat on that little. I was turning that little tidbit over in my head, month after month, and I was sort of sitting with that factoid, and I said, well, maybe I've never really thought about actually writing a book like this, and I've never written something that long. So maybe I should try this myself. So I just sort of wrote it on speculation, and I had the good fortune to talk with Micah Hanks, a friend of mine who runs the Gralien Report, and through him, he put me in contact with Patrick Weege of Anomalist Books. And I also talked to the guys over at Mysterious Universe in the interim, and they were really supportive. And I had a lot of good feedback of people sort of, encouraging me to take this to a publisher. So got hooked up with Patrick Weege and Anomalist Books, and since then it's been a great relationship. That was A Trojan Feast, which is my book about food and drink and all these sort of encounters, UFOs, Bigfoot encounters, and fairy folk encounters as well. Then the second book, also released through Anomalist, was called The Brimstone Deceit, which is all about taking a look at smells of all sorts of things. So ghost smells in UFOs, smells during abduction experiences, Bigfoot smells. It's the only, to my knowledge, it's the most anyone's ever written about the different types of and different possibilities of Bigfoot smells. But also like all sorts of other things go in there too, like El Chupacabras and large anomalous black felines. All that stuff is in the Brimstone Deceit. And then in July of 2018, that's my latest book. It's Thieves in the Night, which is it's called A Brief History of Supernatural Child Abduction. I'm not really sure how brief it is. That was my publisher's idea to put that on there. It's pretty long. Anybody who sees my books knows that they tend to be a little bit longer, and I'm very diligent with citing my sources. So I think this latest book had like 600 endnotes and probably somewhere around the order of like 400 or so sources, if memory serves. So yeah, but my philosophy has always been that when I present this stuff to people, I don't want people to say that I'm making it up or anything. I want to say, look, if there's something wrong in here, I want you to know exactly where what I'm saying comes from. So I probably go overboard on that a little bit, but it's sort of a, covering my tail in a lot of ways. So that's where I am right now. And there's another book that's forthcoming. It's a book between me and my friend Tim Renner, who has the podcast Strange Familiars. And it's we're getting ready to release Volume 1 of a 2-volume series taking a look at high strangeness in Bigfoot reports. And we're finalizing the layout right now. So it's finalizing the layout and then writing the index, and then we push print. So that one will actually be self-published.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, have you had any paranormal or crypto or UFO experiences?
My gut reaction is to just say that I've had a couple of ghost experiences and leave it there, because I'm skeptical in the sense that I always try to look for something to explain something else. I have had some ghost encounters which have been pretty profound to the extent that, like, whenever I do write about ghosts, I kind of don't find it as interesting, because for me it's an answered question, and yeah, these things exist. The first thing that I ever saw, well, if we want to be really comprehensive, I guess we could go back to my childhood when my parents were adding on to their home. There was a period during the construction where in our house I would always find 4 quarters stacked up in the most unlikely of places, like on top of the fridge or like behind a book that we hadn't pulled out in years or something. And I've talked to my mom and dad and my sister since then, and this is some 25, 26, 27 years later, and no one has admitted to that. So I don't know what that is. That sort of sounds kind of like poltergeist phenomena, or even again fairy folk phenomena. But the first thing that was really impactful to me was I was in college and I was visiting Lexington, Virginia, which is where Stonewall Jackson's house is, and we took a tour of the house. And Jackson's house during the war between the states was used as a hospital as well. So if you've ever been there, you'll know that the stairway leading up to the second floor of the house is very narrow to the extent that it's only one person can go up at a time. So what that meant is that while one group was getting ready to come down, they had to wait for the other group to come up, and then the group at the top of the stairs come down. So my tour group was coming up, and I remember looking to my left and seeing in this room at the top of the stairs a rather tall boy, I would say 15-ish, but he was taller than most of the other people in the crowd, and he was in a Civil War uniform. And at the time, he seemed completely, corporeal. It wasn't really that mysterious or anything. And I remember I walked up to my mom, whom I was with, and I said, "You see that kid? He was really into it. I guess he was, I thought he was he was cosplaying or something. I thought he was, or maybe a reenactor or something." And nobody else, including my mother, had seen him on the tour, and nor had anybody issued in the ticket office. No one had given him a ticket that day. So that was the first real thing that I had. I did date a girl for a while who was into ghost hunting, and we went to Waverly Hills Sanitarium. A couple of interesting things happened there. Probably the most profound thing was that I had a big, heavy metal door on, I believe it was the 4th floor. As we came up to a stairwell, the door to the stairwell went from completely shut to completely slamming open right as I was at it. I'm talking about this big, heavy door, completely shut, and it opened as if someone had kicked it from the other side. Like, it opened so hard that it slammed the wall as it opened. Also saw some anomalous light phenomena there, things that looked like they were coming from the blue glow of the TV set just around the corner, and you turn the corner and there would be nothing there. As far as the Bigfoot thing goes, my knee-jerk reaction is to say no. I've never had any sort of Sasquatch thing happen to me, but there are 2 things that I don't really talk about that much that do spring to mind, if you want to hear about them.
Oh, yeah.
Well, so the first one was my wife and I postponed our formal honeymoon until 2018, 2017 actually now, if memory serves. It's hard to believe it was that long ago. When we went to Ireland, but for our actual immediate honeymoon, we drove up to Blue Ridge, Georgia, which is just north of in the northern part of the state. And I was already into the Bigfoot thing, and I was feeling sort of goofy about it. So we were in the hot tub on the back porch. Don't worry, this is a PG story, folks. But there's a hot tub on the back porch that was screened in, overlooking this big valley. I would say holler, but this was like an actual you could see mountains in the distance. It was very high up on this hill. And I was just joking around, and I did some Bigfoot whoops up there. And if you know anything about Blue Ridge, it's actually kind of in a Bigfoot hotspot. There's a wonderful museum up there, run by a gentleman that I'm very blessed to call my friend David Becara. It's a Bigfoot museum called Expedition Bigfoot, and it's a great place. There's some great casts and some great sort of Bigfoot related artifacts that are there. But anyway, so Blue Ridge is sort of a Bigfoot hotspot. I was being silly the last night that we were there before we left the next morning, and I was doing the Bigfoot whoops, which I don't really know if they do anything, to be honest with you. But anyway, I was just joking around. So the next morning we get up and we go to the car. Excuse me. And just to give you an idea of this driveway, it was up. I would say it was up probably about a 300-foot driveway at an extremely steep incline, to the extent that I'm not sure if it snowed and you were at that cabin, you'd be going anywhere. I would say, I think at the risk of hyperbole, it might have even been worse than a 45-degree angle. Anyway, extremely steep. Really, definitely sort of a hike to get up there. And I go out to my car, and sitting behind my car's rear tire, can't remember if it was I have pictures of this somewhere, but I can't remember if it was my rear passenger side or my rear driver's side tire. There is a rock about the size of 2 footballs, so nice, heavy, nice sized rock, sitting behind my tire. Now, there were other homes in the neighborhood, but that's if you're going to go up and play a prank on someone walking up such a steep driveway in the middle of the night, I would want to make sure that my prank was something more obvious than just a rock. There was nowhere that it could have fallen from. There was sort of a hillside was a little bit farther away, but A, it was too far away, and B, it was all red clay. This rock had no red clay on it. It was a clean, just dark, grayish, blackish rock just sitting behind my tire. And so that gave me pause. It's exactly what that was. And I suppose, so, I can't say that that's Bigfoot, but it was an odd thing, especially with us just having done that. And then most recently, I was, last April, I was up in the York, Pennsylvania area with my co-author and friend who I'm doing this new book with, Timothy Renner. And anyone who listens to his podcast, Strange Familiars, knows that he has a research site that he calls Site 7, where there have been some things that have been seen that are highly suggestive of Bigfoot activity, but also he's seen some anomalous lights there. I saw some things that might have been the lights, but I really would. There's nothing that was unambiguous. There's nothing that I can say, yes, it's exactly what it was. I saw, anomalous light. It was sort of, maybe I kind of saw that. That was really sort of disappointing, because apparently when it actually is there, it's very obvious and very dramatic. But I didn't get to see that. But the first time that Tim took me to Site 7, within, I'd say, 30 seconds of us getting out of the car, something goes, and then shuffles away on what sounded like 2 feet. It could have been a whitetail snort or a whitetail grunt. I've listened to recordings of that, and it doesn't quite match. And then, there are the footfalls, which sounded more, bipedal than quadrupedal to me. But again, that could be, something that's like maybe, it's definitely something odd. And it's something odd that's happening in a place where, there's supposedly Bigfoot activity, but I can't definitely say it was Bigfoot. So it's on my bucket list someday, maybe.
Hmm. Well, have you researched or, studied any of the Native Americans, their tales of Sasquatch and Bigfoot and the East Coast or even West Coast, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, different tribes all had sort of different beliefs, and there are plenty of tribes that will talk about them as flesh and blood creatures, and plenty of tribes that will talk about them as spirit beings, and plenty of tribes that will talk about them sort of being, both things. What I find really fascinating is how a lot of this, I'm co-authoring a book on Bigfoot and high strangeness, so I've sort of left the flesh and blood Bigfoot camp in a lot of ways. But it's interesting to me how a lot of the things that you'll read about Bigfoot, in addition to, Native American stories about the little people, a lot of the stuff they talk about specifically with Bigfoot and Bigfoot analogs carry a lot of the same things that you'll find in something like fairy lore of Western Europe. Fairies would make knocking noises, and there are associations, some similar smells noted between things, between both Bigfoot and some of these fairy encounters. And in fact, there's some stories from Western Europe that sound like they're describing what we would call here in the States, Littlefoot, these little Bigfoot that people assume are either a subspecies or a juvenile Bigfoot. But if you talk to, almost universally, I would say, if you talk to, Native American informants, they're going to tell you that, no, this isn't just a little baby Bigfoot. This is actually a separate thing, and this is more in line with the little people, these little hairy people, these little hairy dwarves that we have running around. And, you find direct analogs to that in Western European cultures with stuff like goblins and brownies. It's the exact same description. They look like little monkey men. And so, when looking at that, you're sort of faced with the idea of does this indigenous lore of Western Europe just so happen to be describing little tiny Bigfoots that exist over here, or do they have wild men over there as well, or are we all sort of looking at this big monolithic paranormal thing that wears different masks, or is I don't know what it means. For me, that's where I find a lot of my fascination with these topics is not whether an individual account is true or whether an individual set of belief or mythology or legend or lore is true, but finding the similarities between cultures and eyewitness accounts that should have no connection to one another. And that's sort of what happened with the food taboo thing, because I was like, well, you have this belief in Western Europe where if you take food from the fairies, you're trapped with the fairies forever. And then halfway across the globe, you have this idea that if you take food from Sasquatch in this one particular tribe's belief, then you would be trapped with the Sasquatch forever. And, according to our current understanding of the way the world works, or the way the history works, rather, there should have been no real cross-pollination between these cultures. And yet we see this. And you can look at this, from a global scale, and you can see these same motifs, this idea of this food taboo expressing itself, throughout the entire world. So when looking at something like, sort of indigenous beliefs on Bigfoot and Sasquatch, whatever the particular culture might call them, it's really striking how you'll find similarities not only between the cultures here in the New World, but you'll find almost identical things said about, similar beings in Eurasia, in Europe and Asia.
Well, since where you was talking about the cross pollination, what do you think about ancient civilizations where the Incas and the Mayas they built pyramids similar to what the Egyptians were building. I know this may not be in your area, but I mean, with the Sasquatch, the Faeries, UFOs, and all this, to me, I feel like all this coincides with each other. They connect somehow. And what's your opinion about it? Or your thoughts?
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I think that if you, so I have a good friend, Mike Cleland, who is an experiencer, who's written a book, several books on specifically a lot of his work focuses on the similarity between UFO or the connections between UFOs and owls. He's sort of the owl UFO guy, and he's often has this quote of saying that if you are talking about aliens and UFOs and you don't end up talking about like you don't somehow find your way talking about and taking on bigger questions like the meaning of life and spirituality and God, then you're kind of having the wrong question, or you're having the wrong conversation. And I kind of feel like if you study stuff like, cryptozoology and a lot of this fairy folklore that you find across the world, and you don't find yourself stumbling into discussions of ancient history and stuff like, the mound building cultures and whatnot, if you don't find yourself into that, if you don't find yourself stumbling into that, then you're kind of not pulling the right threads. And I think that there's something really profound going on there. I mean, if you look at the similarities between the mound building cultures of the Americas and some of these traditional fairy sites that you'll find in some place like Ireland, it's astounding. I mean, so you've got, I believe that the more conservative estimates of the number of fairy hills, fairy forts, fairy rats, leos, you'll hear different names, but the number of fairy sites in Ireland, I think, conservatively is estimated at around 60,000, and we're dealing with an island the size of like Indiana. So that gives you some idea of the density of this. And it's really interesting because these sites are, very clearly human constructed. You'll find them in a couple of different forms. Sometimes you'll find them as little circular stone forts. Sometimes there'll be a literal mound with a burial passage underneath. It's called a souterrain. It's where, they would crawl or they would, use as an escape method. These were, either early Christian or Neolithic sites that were built by human hands, and yet they got folded into this fairy belief, and there was a superstition surrounding them, and it's almost like either the fairies were the dead or the fairies moved in after the dead were gone. Anyway, there's this conflation of ancient history and the supernatural that goes hand in hand, and if you look at a lot of the, the mound building cultures in the Americas, there are a lot of similarities that you find, not only with a lot of these mounds having, this component of having human remains interred in them, but also, some of the superstitions that have since grown out around them. A lot of these places are considered sort of haunted, and in some cases, not every case, the cultures that lived near the mounds that were originally associated with building the mounds were often we're on record as saying, we don't know who built these. They were built by some other race, which is sort of what you get from that sort of Irish folklore tradition as well regarding the fairy folk. So it's really interesting to me. I look at some of these. We have a really great mound site here in North Georgia, Etowah, and having seen some of these sites in Ireland and having seen Etowah, I cannot imagine that even if they saw it during its heyday, with a village around it, I can't imagine settlers from the British Isles in particular seeing these giant mounds and not immediately thinking, oh, that looks just like, a fairy fort or, a fairy mound or a fairy hill. And I wonder, I think that there's some sort of connective thread there. I just don't exactly know. I don't exactly know how much we can pull out of that. But it's there. I do think it's there. And similarly, you look at, you mentioned the whole pyramid thing. The most mundane explanation is that somehow the human collective consciousness loves this image, like the shape of the pyramid, which is still kind of a weird thing to think about. The idea that a shape can have that much of an impact on us as a species. That's the most mundane explanation, and I think it's not only the most mundane, but I also think it's one of the lesser plausible one of the lesser plausible things. You know, some of my favorite thinkers on the subject discuss how, you know, we view ancient man as seeing the oceans as an obstacle, but, you know, in reality, they were probably more like highways. You know, they were probably convenient ways to get from the old world to the new world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree. Well, what's your opinion about giants? I know we're talking about the mounds. If I'm not mistaken, the mounds in West Virginia, didn't they find skeletal remains of giants in those mounds?
You know, that's one of those persistent things that there's just too much smoke there for there not to be a fire, in my opinion, because you hear stories, I mean, not just West Virginia. I mean, it was sort of a commonly held belief that a lot of these mounds, a lot of these larger sites were closely associated with giants. And you hear not just literally Bigfoot analogs, but you find, you know, native people here in the New World talking about giants specifically and describing them in really strange ways, having like red hair and 2 rows of teeth. And, you know, you only have to read your 50th article about, you know, these giant remains being discovered with having a row of double teeth, and they're super tall, and the Smithsonian always miraculously swoops in at the last minute to collect them, and now, you know, supposedly there aren't any remains like that at all to be found. You can only read that story so many times before you go, yeah, there's got to be something here. I mean, I realize that, you know, yellow journalism and sensationalism was a problem, you know. Well, I was going to say back then. I think it's a problem now too, in a different sort of way. But you know, I just it's such a consistent story that you keep on seeing time and again. And there are photos, and some of them are obviously fake, and some of them, you know, some of them very well, you know, some of them very well might not be. But a lot of the features that you keep on hearing on these stories are so consistent time and again of these skeletons being unearthed that I just have to think that there's, you know, something there. Similarly, you know, there are, if memory serves, some petroglyphs of some really large hands, sometimes 6-fingered hands, that just don't make much sense without there being some sort of reason for why they would have even come up with you know, come up with drawing something like that, in my opinion.
Well, I agree. And there's another something else that's always bothered me is the fact that a lot of these places that these ancient sites have been built, you know, they got 100 tons or 500 ton stones that have been moved and carved, and you know, you can't even get a piece of paper in between them because they've sculpted them so precise. What's your opinion on it? Do you think that there was maybe possibly maybe some other type of humans that were actually smart or that well advanced at that time, and then somehow or something caused us to, you know, revert backwards instead of forward?
Yeah, you know, I think that's a really great question. There's another site. I'm trying to remember what it is. It's along the Georgia-Florida line. There's another mound site that's quite large, and it's sort of in some ways a perfect example of what you're talking about, because it's made up of, I think, something along the lines of, and I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but an astounding amount of dirt, I think 5 million gallons of dirt, and they've never been able to tell where the dirt's come from because there's no excavation site, and you know, similarly you find that sort of thing, like you said, you know, not only you know, large boulders and stuff in the British Isles, like Stonehenge is the classic example, but also you'll find, you know, not only are these massive rocks, have they been erected, but they've been quarried, you know, hundreds of miles away. And the question is, why would you go to that sort of trouble? And then again, yeah, like you said, also the sort of unique engineering feats that you'll find at Pumapunku, I think, and Gunung Padang, I think is another one of them. So some of these astounding structures that we can't really replicate, or could at the very least replicate with great effort today. I for me, the jury's out. The thing that in a lot of my research, I tend to lean away from something like the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I think that my problem with the extraterrestrial hypothesis is that in regarding, ancient aliens, I have lots of problems with the extraterrestrial hypothesis, but like my problem with the ancient aliens idea is that there's this assumption that our ancestors were mistaking aliens for gods, and I sort of come more of the line of thought that maybe we as modern people are mistaking, for lack of a better term, gods or spirits, some sort of spirit phenomena for aliens. It's sort of where I come in regards to that. I think that I personally think that. So I'm not big on the ancient alien hypothesis. The idea that we've made contact at some point with extraterrestrials in our history, I think, is absolutely possible, if not a surety, in terms of the scope of our existence as a species. Regarding their role in a lot of these ancient sites, I tend to sympathize more with the idea that there have been rises and falls of advanced civilizations in the past. I think that the way the story of Atlantis was told was probably mythic, but I don't think Atlantis itself and the things that they accomplished, or the things that a civilization in the past that Atlantis is used as a stand-in for, I think that the things that they could have accomplished is not a myth. I think that there have been I don't think that the progress from being a primitive society to our current advanced society, I don't think it's a straight line. I think it's with jagged peaks and valleys, and I think some of those peaks might have even been higher than where we are now. If you look at the way that a lot of these cultures, for example, there is a lot of Egyptian artifacts are created, sculptures and whatnot are created or have been sculpted in such a way that they would be extremely difficult, again, if not impossible, to machine to this day. A lot of them created out of this material called diorite. And someone once suggested this, and I can't remember who it is, so if anybody remembers this, my apologies to whoever I'm stealing this from, but someone suggested that, we look at our culture as, things being, we're a culture of metal and plastic. That's what we tend to make everything out of, are metals and plastics. And I think that, we could maybe shift I think that it would be beneficial for us to shift our perspective to looking at these cultures as perhaps having technologies in which they could use stone the way that we use, metal and plastic. The idea that it's not necessarily that they weren't, more primitive than us in a lot of ways, but they were more advanced working with other materials than we are, simply because we didn't choose that branch. We didn't choose as a culture to make everything out of stone. Certainly not past the 1930s. Every building nowadays is glass and steel. It's hideous. But we didn't choose that path of making everything out of stone. We chose this metallurgy plastic path. So the idea, for me, I tend to sympathize more with the idea that there were cultures that were more advanced working with other materials than we are currently today. While still leaving the door open for stuff like, perhaps, not only extraterrestrial visitation, but also some form of communication from the other world, sort of delivering knowledge that human beings weren't supposed to have of the way to manipulate our world to us as well.
That's a good way of thinking about that. I agree. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say I don't know. This is all. I could be absolutely wrong about everything I'm saying. This is just where I wound up after looking at this for a while.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I've spoke with so many people, and I've had my own ideas and thoughts, and I investigate the paranormal, and I've been doing investigations for going on 12 years now. Granted, I did a little bit when I was growing up, but But the more I get into it, the more I do research, UFOs, cryptos, somehow, fairies, all these different stories or something, giants, somehow, some way starts trickling into the paranormal part of what I do. And that's one thing I've always had an open mind about. A lot of the other paranormal groups are just focused on, the paranormal ghosts, spirits, and stuff like that. But I see there's just too much of it that expands it out with all the other that we're discussing now, and what other researchers have seen and have shown that there is a huge connection, and it even goes way back in time, even till today.
No, I could not agree with you more. I think two things. So I think number one, if anybody says that they absolutely know exactly what's going on, run the other way, right?
That's right.
Because if you can't admit, at least some degree of ignorance, what you can say is you can say a lot of things seem to suggest this. It seems like X pattern happens over and over again. But as far as someone saying, it's all demons or something, like just don't pay any attention to someone who says that because they have an agenda, because nobody really knows exactly what all this means. But yeah, so what you were saying, I agree wholeheartedly. There was a time when I kept these different topics sort of siloed off in different things. Like, here's my ghost box, and here's my Bigfoot box, and here's my Nessie box, and here's my UFO box, and here's And the more you look at this stuff, there is so much bleed over. And I used to be. So, I started off keeping things separate, and then I said, well, maybe it's not separate. Maybe it's all one thing. And then I was really on the, it's all one thing sort of bandwagon. But I think that, the older that I've gotten, and the more that I've looked at this, the less comfortable I am with that statement. Where I've sort of settled is that if these things are not all sort of the same thing, like the old analogy of the blind man and the elephant. One man thinks it's a tree trunk because he's touching the elephant's leg, and one man thinks it's a snake because he's touching the elephant's trunk, and one man thinks that it's it's a giant it's a sheet because he's holding the elephant's ear. When really they're all touching an elephant, they're just touching different parts and they don't realize it. Setting that aside, the idea that this is all one big thing, UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, they're all part of this one big thing. If that's not the case, then I think if you are well-read and well-researched and sort of paying attention, like you obviously are, I think you have to say that at the very least, these things overlap. There's some overlap in that Venn diagram. So, if you've ever done a Venn diagram, you've got the two circles and they overlap at a certain point, and that's the shared content. And I think that if these aren't the same thing, the UFO circle overlaps with the Bigfoot circle, overlaps with the alien abduction circle, overlaps with this, that, the other. I mean, the alien ghost thing is really, it's really fascinating to me because Kenneth Ring back in, I guess maybe it was the 90s, did a survey of people who had near-death experiences and people who had abduction experiences, and found that there were an astonishing amount of similarities. Being levitated into a bright light, and getting a feeling of peace sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes getting a feeling of peace, seeing dead loved ones. That happens in alien abductions more than people realize, that you actually see dead loved ones. And obviously we associate ghosts with near-death experiences, and so what does that mean? How does that connect between ghosts and near-death experiences to the alien contact experience? And then you've also got this fairy thing, which, if you look at the fairy lore of Western Europe, there is no doubt in my mind after looking at this that the fairy lore of Western Europe is describing the same thing as the alien abduction experience. As to what that is it aliens, is it fairies, is it something different? I don't know, but I'm convinced that they're describing the same thing. So you've got the fairies. The fairy lore looks a lot like the abduction lore, and then you have this association in a lot of these cultures of the fairies cavorting with the dead. A lot of times people would go to fairyland and they'd see their dead neighbor or their dead relative with the fairies. Sometimes the fairies were the dead. And yet they share all these aspects with aliens. And by that I mean, short stature, missing time, levitation. I found examples of basically what are alien implants in fairy lore. It's all there. So you've got the dead associated with fairies, and fairies seem a lot like aliens. And, this is something I've been talking about in this new book, is that people have missing time associated with Bigfoot encounters. People have, it's sort of a poorly kept secret at this point that a lot of places of Sasquatch activity, of heavy Sasquatch sightings, people will see these orbs, these ghost lights, not necessarily with Sasquatch, but, what sort of company do these things keep? Why is this all in one place? Is it just so happened that, that ghost lights like to hang out wherever these flesh and blood monkeys are? That pushes that I find that a little bit hard to believe for me personally. I tend to think that we have these window areas where there's this something leaches in from someplace else. That's sort of where I am. And while still leaving the door open to be completely wrong. Maybe it is as sort of quote unquote simple as we're led to believe. Maybe Bigfoot is a giant monkey and UFOs do come from other planets and ghosts are just dead people. But I tend to see this all as just as having more in common than we give it credit.
Well, I agree because the first experience I had to have at Bleed Over was we were doing an investigation. It was at a lake, and the guy was with me. He's actually a detective for local police department, and we were walking on a path that went around, and it's paved. And of course, you can hear us. I had a recorder going, and you can hear us, stepping, click, 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 click. But within a few seconds of us stepping on the path, it sounded like we were in like a huge hangar and walking across a catwalk. It went from click, click, click to clang, 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 clang. And you could hear us speaking with this huge echo. And this lasted for like 15 seconds. So when I was listening to the audio and I heard this, I went to Mike and I said, listen to this and tell me what you hear. He listened to it and he looked at me and he said, holy shit. Where were we? I said, well, we were in the woods walking on a path. He's like, I know that, but it sounds like we went into a building or we was in a building. I said, you tell me, buddy, you're the cop.
Man, that's the sort of thing that's the sort of really strange thing that I absolutely love. And something that's come up in this Bigfoot work is like, there was a great book by Al Berry and Jenny Slate. It's out of print now, but it was called Bigfoot. And Al Berry was the one who, with Ron Moorhead, recorded the Sierra sounds. And, one of the things that they noticed in a lot of their Bigfoot research is that they would actually find, they would leave out recorders, and they would get recordings of like machinery moving under the ground in these places where they had seen Bigfoot, or and that sort of brings to mind stories of machinery being heard under the ground at Skinwalker Ranch. Tim Renner, who you should talk to Tim sometime. He's a really nice guy, and he's had some really profound experiences happen to him. But he was in the woods and got this feeling of panic. And he said that he has heard what sounded like machinery, like gears clicking into place. Click, 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 click. And then everything was quiet, and the feeling of dread just lifted. And he ended up going home. But, I think there was a smell associated with that particular encounter of his too. So this idea that just weird stuff that shouldn't make any sense. This idea that you can sound like you're walking through a building in the middle of the woods. It's crazy, but it's these sort of things happen, and again, being such a fan of fairy lore, I think about these things, and I think about stories of the dwarves mining underneath the earth and stuff. That's sort of where my mind tends to go.
Well, do you think it might be some type of? This is another theory I have that kind of I think ties in the Bigfoot and paranormal and UFOs is maybe some type of wormhole or some type of time space displacement or some type of parallel universes they're seeping through or something. What's your thought on all that?
Yeah, I think that you're probably closer to the mark than a lot of the more traditional, quote unquote, traditional ideas are. I do think that there is. I think that we understand time very, very poorly, and I think that at least some portion of people who see ghosts are seeing some sort of time slip phenomena where they're seeing things that happen rather than actually seeing, a discarnate spirit, in the present day. They're somehow seeing into the past or something like that. Maybe that explains some of the Bigfoot stuff too. Maybe we're seeing, maybe we are seeing Gigantopithecus or some sort of other relic hominid. But yeah, I mean that's entirely a possibility. I think that there's a lot to be said for thinking of this stuff in an interdimensional capacity. My problem with that is that we have such a poor idea of what that even means, like what other dimensions are, and we're sort of playing games with words when you get to that point. Because one culture's interdimensional entity is another culture's spirit that came from the spirit world or something. We're just it's almost as if our culture uses the term interdimensional as a placeholder for what people would have said heaven or hell or fairyland or Middle Earth or any number of things. It doesn't really change the meaning of what it is, and we have such a poor grasp on what it means for there to be other dimensions that it kind of, I think it sort of renders that concept, to me at least, not as powerful as it should be, while at the same time saying that, yes, I think that that's closer to the mark than saying that, we've got giant undiscovered monkeys running around the woods and we're being visited by, aliens and nuts and bolts spacecraft. I think that more of a John Keel sort of approach is for me, that resonates more closely with the way that I've seen things.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's your opinion about, and your thoughts on where the Bible has kind of mentioned like Bigfoot or aliens or UFOs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a practicing Christian myself, so I think that a couple of things are happening. I think that so I one of the things that I like to come back to is a lot of this research that's gone into dimethyltryptamine, DMT, which is it's one of, if not the world's most powerful hallucinogen, although hallucinogen is sort of an unfair term. A lot of people would push back. It has psychedelic qualities, and it's found in most plants, but it's not orally active because of monoamine oxidase, and it's the primary ingredient in the South American brew of ayahuasca, which the locals figured out of all the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of plants and plant combinations. They found the one plant with the chacruna plant that has a high content of DMT, and they found Banisteriopsis caapi, which actually has an MAO inhibitor, which makes DMT orally active. Now, I say all this because DMT is also produced in the human body. And it's been confirmed to be found in the pineal glands of not only rats, but recently pineal glands of humans as well. As far as the role that it plays, no one's really sure. It's definitely tied into melatonin and tryptophan all those nice things. Some people think that it has a role to play in sleep. Some people think that it has a role to play in edge detection, which is how you catch things in the periphery of your vision. But suffice to say, we are all carrying the world's most powerful psychedelic in our brains right now. And it's been theorized a lot that perhaps some of these visions, not only, the visions that people who are holy people who have dedicated their time to meditating and sort of freeing their body, somehow that they're getting a dump of DMT from their own bodies into their system, and that is not making them hallucinate in the sense that they're seeing things that aren't there, but rather it's producing a doorway or a gateway for them to see into another world. To see, in other words, people like to say, oh, well, it's DMT, it's just a hallucinogen, people are seeing things, and what they're really doing is they're confusing the key with the room. In other words, the key unlocks the room. The key is not the room. The key is not what's inside the room. The key allows you to see inside the room. So, circling back around to that, I think that if you look at the experiences that people of a lot of different cultures have, I'm thinking about, Ezekiel on the wheel and stuff, people who tend to be pious tend to focus on inward reflection, and perhaps, I'm sorry, that's my antique clock going off. It'll be down in a minute. But people who tend to approach these disciplines tend to be able to attain different states of consciousness that I think probably allow them to tap into what we call heaven, and allow them to actually interact more easily with these other spirits and other beings and whatnot. The reason I prefaced all this is because there's some interesting lines of thought that suggest that the burning bush was actually a burning acacia bush. And if it was a burning acacia bush, certain strands of acacia actually have a high dimethyltryptamine DMT content. And while DMT is not orally active, it is very much active if inhaled through the lungs. So the idea that perhaps there was a burning bush that was burning and Moses inhaled this, and he actually had this infusion of DMT, and he was actually allowed to more easily see and more easily hear, the voice of God. I think that there's something to, coming back around to your original question again, the idea of, the Nephilim and sort of how a lot of these giants were described in the Book of Enoch. I think that there is some really not encouraging, it's the wrong word, some strong evidence to suggest that, that they are talking about what we would know as Bigfoot and Sasquatch. I mean, if my personal thoughts on whatever Bigfoot Sasquatch is have any sort of credibility to them, and honestly, there's a lot of strong evidence that Bigfoot is a giant primate. There's a lot of convincing evidence that way, but there's a lot of other stuff that sort of refutes that. I tend to fall on that side that whatever Bigfoot is something a lot stranger and comes from someplace else. Then it would stand to reason that whatever this is has been with us since those early Hebrew texts were first written, and it makes complete sense to me that there could be a not divine, but an otherworldly in the traditional Judaic sense component to what they are. There's a really interesting story of a very highly placed member of the Church of Latter-day Saints who claimed to have met a very tall man completely covered in hair, walking alongside the road, and he talked to him, and he said, who are you? And this being, basically by all description sounds like a Bigfoot, said to him, I'm Cain, and I've been doomed to wander the earth forever, ever since I slew my brother. And then, if memory serves in the story, this highly placed LDS church member, I'm talking about somebody who wrote books that are still used in the Church of Latter-day Saints. He tried to engage with this creature who called itself Cain, and the creature sort of disappeared. But the idea that, you know, Cain was covered in hair and started wandering the earth forever. So there are a lot of biblical connections there. You know, I think that it's as valid an idea as any of the other ones out there for Bigfoot.
Well, do you think that there would be any ramifications if aliens and Bigfoot and were actually proven to be real? How would you think it would affect all the religious sects and groups in the world?
You know, that's a really good question that I've put some thought into. You know, the typical thing that you'll hear is a couple of different scenarios. So let's just go with the UFO thing for right now. So the commonly held idea is that the government's knows more about UFOs, and they're letting on that we're being visited by aliens, and they're not telling everybody because it might cause a panic, or, you know, there's other reasons for secrecy, whatever. And, you know, taking on this idea, people have hypothesized that, you know, if it was proven that there were other species coming to see us, you know, how would that impact our religion? You know, because we've been taught, as, you know, at least as Christians, that you know, Jesus Christ came to save mankind. Well, did Jesus' death also absolve the sin of the Zeta Reticulans? You know, that's the big question. Or did Jesus do a tour of every planet? Does every planet have its own Jesus? You know, could aliens, could extraterrestrials convert to Christianity? Would that, you know, ethically, would that be okay? I tend to, again, with me not being as much of a fan of the extraterrestrial idea, I tend to think that, yes, the government knows about things, and yes, they are hiding it, but the reason that they're hiding it is because the reality of what it is means that our current understanding of the way that the world works is completely wrong. It means that, you know, the current scientific outlook is one of materialism, the idea that it must be measured, and the only things that can be measured and are actually real are things that are material, things that can be measured. If my suspicions are correct, and the whole UFO, you know, alien abduction thing has more of a spiritual dimension, then that means that materialism is incorrect, and that means that, guess what? The final arbiter of your life, your existence, is not any sort of governmental body. In other words, every transgression that you have against the government is backed up theoretically on the use of force, right? Even if it's traffic tickets, theoretically, if you keep on avoiding that, they could, you know, try to arrest you. If you avoid arrest, they're going to, you know, beat you senseless. So the use of force is always at the end, theoretically, of any sort of law that's enacted, right? And if it's revealed that your body is just, you know, it's like a meat car, and your actual self is actually, you know, some sort of soul or spirit, then they don't have the final say on what happens to you. You know, the idea of physical force is the only thing that keeps them in power is the threat of physical force. And if you take that away from them by proving the fact that you are not just a biological robot who is going to die and go off into nothingness, if that is not what they can hold over your head, then they lose all power. It's sort of like the idea that people have hypothesized that if you could prove the afterlife, you know, how many people would commit suicide because they're like, well, this isn't the end. You know, if I die, it's not the end. Let's just go ahead and, you know, cut out the middleman. So sometimes I wonder if the reason for UFO secrecy is not because of anything other than the fact that they realize that if we all knew the fact that materialism isn't the end game, if we all knew the fact that there is a spiritual reality to our existence, then they would no longer have power over us. And I think that would be the big question if we're looking at, you know, the UFO thing from that angle, as opposed to being flesh and blood beings. I think that you would probably have a lot more people, become more spiritual and religious. Similarly, I mean, it's that question of, from a Christian standpoint of salvation. If Bigfoot is, some people have said that Bigfoot's a human-like ape, and some have said that it's an ape-like human. Well, excuse me. If Bigfoot is an ape-like human, then did Jesus die for the Bigfoot? Or, even worse, going down the line of thought that we were talking about earlier, if these are the offspring of the fallen ones or something, then that would be something that would, I think, shake everybody to their core. I mean, that to me is sort of the worst case scenario, is that these Bigfoot are actually the demonic giants of Genesis. That's something that I think is probably the most chilling possibility, more than anything else. So I think regardless of what would happen, it would have a profound impact. And of course, I'm just addressing this from the Christian perspective. I honestly think a lot of other religions would probably have an easier time accepting it. I think specifically of Islam, and how much they still a lot of Muslim cultures still believe in the jinn, which are used as an explanation for all sorts of stuff. If you really dig into the jinn stuff, it's basically a reskinning of the fairy faith motif, the fairy folklore. There's so many similarities, in terms of them and have them. They create changelings. They live in abandoned areas. They eat trash disguised to look like delicious food. The jinn and the fairies seem to be very much the same, but also a lot of Muslim cultures will sort of use the jinn as a catch-all for all sorts of anomalous things. So I think that I think that of the Abrahamic religions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, I think Islam would probably fare the best, because they still have some wiggle room for this, and for this sort of spiritual dimension of things, either the UFO thing or the I think that there would be a lot of people, a lot of Muslims would probably find a way to reconcile the fact that that Bigfoot or large hairy hominids would be jinn or something along those lines. As far as so I think that Christianity would probably have one of the harder times wrestling with it, because we don't really build in a lot of wiggle room into a lot of our Christian worldview, because it tends to either be, I don't know if you found this to be your experience too, but I feel like when you view these phenomena through a Christian lens, everything becomes an angel or a demon. And I'm not entirely sure that's the case. Like, I know good people and I know bad people, and I know all sorts of people in between who can go either way. I know bad people who have become good and good people who have become bad. And I wonder if the spiritual dimension of reality is not filled with entities of a similar state. There are good things and there are bad things, and there are things in between that could go either way.
Well, since you mentioned demons, I've been, like I said, been an investigator for around 12 years, and I've never came across anything I would call demonic. I've came across things that I would call, playful, or maybe a little too playful, but nothing demonic. And since you mentioned it a few times, what's your opinion about demons? Because I've also run into people that have talked about demonic Bigfoot and demonic aliens. And granted, I've not seen or heard anything like that, but I've had people talk about it. So what's your opinion about all that?
I think that if you really talk to, this may not be your impression, but I think most paranormal people who are really into the ghost hunting, really into the ghost investigation thing that I talk to, they don't run into stuff that just seems like a straight up demonic presence that often. They'll find bad things, or like you said, playful things, but they don't find something that just seems like absolute pure evil. If you unpack a lot of the sort of these named demons that we have in the sort of goetic pantheon, a lot of them were just sort of pagan gods that when Christianity came in, they said, oh, that god you're worshiping, no, that's a demon. So then that name got associated with that particular, that became a demon name as opposed to, just the god's name wherever this village was where they came in. Now, having said that, I'm not downplaying the fact that I think there's some genuinely evil stuff out there, and I think that there's some stuff that, I think that true objective evil does exist in our world. I, knock on wood, haven't run into anything like that either. But I think that a lot of these things, especially in terms of hauntings and, sort of what we would call oppression cases, I think a lot of them, they give you what you give them. If that makes any sense. So I think from what I know, and again, ghost hunting is not exactly my bailiwick, but from what I can tell, a lot of these things tend to react to how you react. At least some portion of what we would call hauntings do have a component that is completely based on the individual. I mean, it's, at one point it was widely believed that poltergeists were actual, spirits in a house, but the more research that's been done on it, it seems that many times the poltergeist is actually some sort of mind psi phenomena that's manifested around a person. It's typically, one of the focal points of a lot of poltergeist activity is a young girl who's going into puberty. A lot of times they'll be the sort of the focal point that around a lot of this stuff happens. And, as soon as they leave the house or they get through this rough patch, then the poltergeist activity clears up. So it seems like it's much more of a mind influencing the world sort of thing. And I think that sometimes, if not literally that sort of same thing where, the mind of someone is projecting some stuff out, I think that sometimes there are entities out there that, will come into a situation for whatever reason and will sort of react to an individual or get what an individual is putting out and behave accordingly. So, if someone is really quite fearful or something, it's really interesting to me the number of people who supposedly have demonic infestations in their house who are very religious, who are quick to say, "Oh, it must be a demon," and then this thing starts behaving like a demon. Not always the case, but it does seem to be the case in at least a significant portion of accounts. So as far as I do think that demons exist. I think that they are used way too much as a catch-all for a lot of these things. I think that, to say that everything, the sort of joke that's going around a lot of my friend circles, everything's a demon. So, Bigfoot's a demon and UFOs are demons. And, while in some sense I'm more sympathetic to that outlook than a lot of people because I do think that a lot of these things have a spiritual component to them, I have to stop short of saying that everything that behaves negatively is a demon. I think some things are just bad, but they're not evil. They're just bad. That's sort of my 2 cents. That's sort of my 2 cents. And, I think that demonic infestation of a home and possession, I think that they are very real things, and I think that they do happen. I just think that they happen a lot less than we are led to believe that they are by popular culture and by our own sort of reactions to the way that we see things. Mm-hmm. But again, like I said earlier, I could be completely wrong and I'll face about that. It's just sort of, yeah.
Well, I agree with you on that, though. It's something we haven't ran into, and even if we did, I've got a priest to help us with that. But thank goodness we never had to use him for it. But I do think a lot of the people that call me up and want me to come investigate their place, they're talking about pots and pans flying around and the demon trying to, have sex with them or just outlandish stuff. And then when we come there and go, and do the investigation, I'm like, ain't nothing going on. They're talking about this place off the foundation and, going to portals and more. I'm like, I'm sleepy. I want to go home.
Yeah. It's like you know, I keep on smelling brimstone. Well, ma'am, your septic tank is overflowing. You know? Yeah.
That is one thing I've noticed. They hate when I sit down with them and say, okay, your hot water heater's kicking, and when it kicks, it's causing the pipes to vibrate, which is in turn making it sound like something's walking across or bumping your floor. One lady, she talked about her attic hearing scratching. So we put a camera back at the door that goes into the attic, and guess what was scratching? The door. It wasn't a ghost. It was two mouse and a rat. A bat.
Yeah, you know, like, it's one of those things where people, well, you know, where people hear you say something like that, and then they assume that you're just a debunker, that you don't believe in stuff. But no, I mean, like, the reality of it is that the people who have their head on right simultaneously realize that a lot of the stuff can be explained, but sometimes, man, some of it is just, it can't be explained, and there is an actual reality to this stuff. But you should always try to find the mundane explanation. And, you know, to that end, I kind of wonder sometimes, whether or not we actually have a lot more paranormal stuff happen in our day-to-day lives, and because we are so inclined to find the most rational explanation, we just write it off. Like, you know, you catch something out of the corner of your eye, I'm like, oh, I guess it was a trick of the light. It didn't happen again. Who knows? Maybe that was, you know, maybe that was a shadow person that you just happened to catch. And I don't think that that's I don't think that that's out of the question. That you know, I think that you should always be rational, but I think that sometimes there are some things that we just, if you are really inclined to be rational, you end up writing off. But yeah, there's a difference between a small S, as my friend Micah Hanks says. There's a difference between a small S skeptic and a big S skeptic. You know, so if you're a big S skeptic, you don't think that you automatically go into it thinking that none of this has any sort of basis in reality. And if you're a small S skeptic, you say, well, these things happen, but they're really rare, or they're, you know, rarer than we would like to think. Or maybe at the same time, I think they're more common than we like to think. But anyway, you go into a situation, you try to find the most rational explanation, and then when you can't, you're like, well, that's kind of odd, you know. And I think that there's plenty of room there between it. Yeah.
Well, I know me and Robin went to actually, this guy's a friend of mine. Went to his house to do a pre-investigation interview with him. And I was standing in the kitchen with him, and a little, looked like 5-6 year old blonde-headed girl, and Robin was in the living room with the wife and the 2 teenage kids. Well, you know, we talked, and we was going to go outside, and I always wait to last to go out anytime I go anywhere. I like to hold the door for everybody. It's just the thing I do. And the little girl was, you know, in front of me, and you know, and she said, "Thank you," and I'm like, "You're welcome." So, you know, they went out and done their thing, and I went to the van and waited. And Robin came back, you know, and we was going up the road, and we was talking about what we was discussing, you know, the questions and everything. And I told her, I said, "Robin, you know, that little blonde-haired girl, she was so beautiful. What'd you think about her?" She's like, "What blonde-haired girl?" I said, "The one that's in the kitchen." She's like, "Rod, there wasn't no blonde-haired girl in the kitchen." I said, "There was a blonde-haired little girl, 5-6 years old, standing right there beside James." And I said, she just kept, I said, "Robin, she was there the whole time." "Rod, I don't know what you're talking about." So it upset me so bad, I turned around and went back to their house. And knocked on the door and talked to them. And I'm like, "James, where's that blonde-haired girl?" He's like, "Let me see your daughter." So he brought out the teenager. And I'm like, no, I'm talking about the 5-6 year old. He said, "What are you talking about?" And she was as real as me and you standing side by side each other. And you know, that has bothered me ever since. But she was happy. She was real. I know she was real. And I can't explain it. Everybody says she wasn't there, but I know what I saw.
Yeah, those are my those are my favorite things to see, or when or to hear about, or when people in the moment don't realize that it's odd. When it seems so real that they just sort of go, they sort of accept as part of their reality, and then like, wait, there's no way that could have been the case. That's when it just really, really blows my mind.
It kind of gives you the goosebumps, but in a way you're like, I know she's real. I know what I saw. And a lot of the other people that's in my group, they're like, why can we not have experiences like you have? I'm like, I don't know. and that's another point I was going to ask you. Why is it that some people see things like, like you've discussed, what I've discussed, and other people that and some people wait, all their life and never seen anything or experienced anything that's unusual or paranormal or different?
Yeah, so I mentioned the whole Kenneth Ring near-death experience thing, comparing it to alien abductees, and one of the things that he found, sort of a controversial take on it, but one of the things that he found were both people who had near-death experiences and people who claimed alien abduction experiences both had a higher incidence, not 100% obviously, but a higher incidence of childhood trauma. Not that that's the case in every case, because I know plenty of people who didn't have, childhood trauma to have encounters with these things and experiences with these things. But having said that, Ring's assertion was that childhood trauma sets people up from an early age to be able to lapse very easily into dissociative states, to sort of distance themselves from their own body so that they go into an altered state. And that's where, once you're in this altered state, where you have this interaction with these other things. But having said that, I can think of one friend who had some childhood trauma who has a lot of strange stuff happening, but I can think of plenty of people in my life that I've met, in these paranormal circles who don't have any sort of, childhood abuse or trauma that they've informed me of. Interestingly enough, childhood illness or sickness or trauma is one of the things that you find a lot of, shamans, witch doctors, holy people in a lot of, tribal cultures. So there's another connection of people who are able to communicate with the spirit world being, sort of affected by this trauma early in their life. But again, like I said, a couple times already, there are plenty of people who don't have this sort of background who end up seeing this sort of stuff all the time. And I just don't know. I'm like, we talked sort of at the beginning of this about the couple things that I've encountered, but for the most part, I think I'm, paranormal kryptonite myself. I don't have nearly the number of experiences. Now, of course, I don't always put myself, in the way of it, but I think part of it is people actually going out and seeking it. There's a gentleman I greatly admire named Gordon White who says, if you go to an old abandoned insane asylum with a Ouija board overnight, you're probably going to have something happen to you, and you're not going to be able to put the toothpaste back in the tube. You're not going to be able to walk that back. I think part of it's putting yourself in the way of these things, but I think some people are just, encounter prone. It was one of those things that back in the early days of ufology, people who had seen multiple UFOs were sort of looked on with derision. They were sort of viewed skeptically. They used to be called repeaters, and they sort of derogatorily called repeaters because it was like, most people don't see a UFO. Why does someone see, 4 UFOs in their life? And now sort of the perspective of a lot of, paranormal researchers is done on 180. We think that if you have something happen to you and it's a one-off, it's probably not less believable, but it's even more believable when people are repeat experiencers, because there's something about the person that I think does attract these things. And I think that some people are just more for by merit of either their family history, or by merit of something that's happened in their life, or by merit of some sort of spiritual discipline, or again, whether or not they put themselves in places and situations where they can encounter these things. I think some people are just more likely to have it happen to them. I have tried plenty of times to put myself in some of these situations, and I don't have things happen to me, and that's something I kind of go back and forth on. Do I actually want do I actually want to see or experience something, or do I not? Yeah. But it's I could do a better job of going out and seeking this stuff. I think that it's a variety of factors, and I think that I think that the person is as important as the phenomena itself. I think there's something deeply connected to the witnesses in these cases. The witnesses are bringing something to the table, as well as whatever this exterior force is happening to them. So, despite me not having a lot of stuff happen to me, I still have sort of rationally gotten to a place where I'm like, look, some of these stories are just too impressive to discount. There is an objective reality to each of these things. There's an objective reality to the UFO thing. There's an objective reality to ghosts. Again, that's probably what I have the most experience with. But there's also objective reality to a lot of these cryptid sightings. Some cryptids I'm more skeptical of than others, but I think. Oh yeah. Yeah.
But the childhood trauma that you mentioned, I mean, I had that, and I do think that it does make a difference, because the people that's been in my group, they've asked me, why do you see things or hear things that we don't? And even when we do our recordings, video or audio at an investigation, I would say 90% of the time we'll get a EVP of someone saying, Rodney, Rod, whether it be male, female, child, old, young. It doesn't bother. At first, it kind of bothered me, but it don't bother me no more. But the people in my group are kind of like, how don't it bother you that the fact that you're in someone's house or someplace that we've never been before, but yet we're getting EVP throughout the night of somebody or something? You're going, hi, Rod. Hey, Rodney. It's me, Rod. Don't that bother you? And I'm like, well, no, because I don't know who the hell it is.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's that is pretty intense, though. Yeah, man. I don't know. I think that I have I sort of alluded to this. A friend of mine, a close friend of mine, who has had some pretty intense abuse in his past, and he was in a home where he was having a lot of pretty intense activity happening. Seeing things, hearing things, misplacing things, and I kept on trying to tell him, because there are some other things about him and his lifestyle that really make me think that it's sort of him. And I kept on trying to tell him, I don't think it's the house that you're in. I think it's you. And I don't know whether that means that you are attracting some sort of outside force, or that your mind is acting on your environment around you. Like, I don't know if you're actually projecting as a thought form these things that end up being able to affect the environment around you. But I think that you are the center of whatever this is. And he seemed pretty adamant that it was the house. And he recently moved. I say recently, probably about 8 months now. He recently moved homes, and everything was hunky-dory. And then he texted me a couple of days ago and was like, yeah, things are happening again. And I said, well, it's because it's not, if you really want this to stop genuinely, you've got to sort of do some self-work, I think. And, it doesn't seem to be anything, it doesn't seem to be as intense, but there's some things that are happening that are pretty unambiguous. So, I wish that there was, I wish that there was a way to really facilitate these experiences with, without having to go to such extremes. But, I'm sure that there are people who say, well, start meditating and, or, here's some mushrooms, take some of these. I wish there was some a little bit. I don't have the patience for meditation, and I'm terrified of psychedelics. So here we are. I've got to find other ways to get my fix.
Well, we're running out of time, so I'll hit you up with two more questions, and I know one of
them
you're going to laugh at, but the reason why I want to ask this is because a lot of it keeps coming up, and it bothers me that people actually think this. But first off, what's your opinion about any cultures or civilizations that supposedly are living in the center of the earth? And the second one is, what about flat earthers? What's your opinion about that?
Well, I'm not going to outright laugh. As far as no, I mean, there is so there's a really strong tradition of things under the earth, whether it's the old Richard Shaver mysteries of the Darrows and the Tarots, or it's the fairy tradition. Fairyland was almost always underground. People nowadays say that Bigfoot likes to live in caves. People say that there are underground alien bases. All these things there's always this idea that there's some sort of hidden world below our feet. And, as far as center of the earth, it's sort of like that hollow earth tradition. I don't necessarily ascribe to that, but I think it's entirely possible, if not likely, that if these things do have a physical reality, that they're using caverns and caves and the underground as well. From a more symbolic standpoint, I mean, there's a lot of things that somebody like Carl Jung would say about going below the earth being symbolic of going below our psyche, going below the fabric of our reality. It's sort of an idea of a world beneath a world, which is sort of what we're talking about. We're talking about these things, whatever they are, inhabiting another dimension or another reality right alongside ours. So I tend to view things living underground as a bit more of a metaphor for the fact that they live not underground, but just on the other side of our reality. But at the same time, like I said, there are plenty of stories of weird things happening in caves. And I am, at least in some part, sympathetic to ideas that there might be a breakaway civilization living in either underground facilities or underground caves. People like to talk about how poorly explored the oceans of our planet are, but that they really pale in comparison, I feel, to a lot of these cave systems that exist, and how far do these things go, and how far deep do these things go? Nobody really knows. So, yeah, I think that there's something to it. I don't know if we're looking at an entire civilization living underground, but I think that, again, if these things do have a physical component to them, I think that these underground spaces are important, either as a place to live or a place where you get in the right mindset to put you into an altered state to communicate with these things. I've been talking about altered states and psychedelics and stuff, and what I hope that nobody takes it away that I think that these things are just in people's minds. I think that these are altered states and psychedelics are ways to communicate and to interface with these other things that are objectively real. We just, in our normal waking state, where we're, driving our cars and going to work and, taking care of the kids, we just don't allow ourselves to get into that mindset where we can actually interact with these things. Now, as far as the flat Earth thing goes,
sorry.
Well, here's the thing. I appreciate where it comes from, because where it comes from is in a very, I think, honestly, honorable and time-honored tradition of being skeptical of gatekeepers, right? Being skeptical of official stories, being skeptical of anything that you can't, touch or see with your own two eyes. You can't hold with your own hands. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people think that I'm sort of a regressive mouth breather, because I think that a lot of what I hear about quantum theory just doesn't pass the smell test for me. It sounds like BS. I think that the idea of the Big Bang sounds like BS. It's like Terence McKenna once said, all scientists want is one good miracle, and then they'll explain the rest. So I understand that idea of like being skeptical of the initial story, and I think that NASA has a long history of bending the truth in some ways. I do think we went to the moon. I also think it's highly possible that the moon photos and the moon footage was staged. Even though I do think we went to the moon, I think that it might have been, staged as an insurance policy. So again, I get where the flat Earth thing comes from. I think the flat Earth thing is largely fueled by a lot of people who sort of started expressing an interest in it, ironically, being trolls, basically. My good friend Tim Binnall from Binnall of America podcast, he's also a writer for Coast to Coast, actually went to the Flat Earth Convention recently, and apparently a lot of Flat Earthers are great, great folks, and a lot of them are reasonable about everything else, but whether or not the Earth is round or not. I guess where I sort of fall on it is that I think that the Earth is round, but I can understand why people would want to question the official story, in a lot of ways. And I think that notions of the flat Earth are not helped by some of these other stories, which I think have a lot more validity to them about strange things being found in Antarctica that are not being shared with the public. So in other words, in flat Earth circles, the idea flat Earth circles, that's sort of an ironic choice of words. And amongst a lot of flat Earthers, there's this idea that, you reach the North Pole or the South Pole, and it's just this giant wall of ice, and there are guards there that won't let you pass. And I think that if you take that story and you combine it with some of these headlines that I think are actually quite real about something odd being found in Antarctica, and a lot of different people, former astronauts, former heads of state, have visited Antarctica in different capacities to see something. And nobody really knows what it is, and there are rumors that it's an extraterrestrial thing or it's ruins of an ancient civilization. I think that those stories, which I put a lot more stock in, sort of feed into the flat Earth idea that there are armed guards at the end of the Earth waiting to shoot you if you try to see the reality that the Earth just ends and it goes over a cliff into nothingness. So I guess as a guy who was born and raised in the South, my final word on the flat Earthers would probably be bless their hearts. I think that I get where they're coming from, but I think that there's some willful ignoring of some things when it comes to that sort of outlook on things. No offense to anybody who's a flat earther. Like I said, I appreciate where you're coming from. I just think that, I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that yes, the world is indeed round.
Yeah, no offense to none of them. I've spoke to a few of them. They're really nice people, but there's just too much evidence that shows that the Earth is round, but it's all right. Everybody has a right to their own opinions and beliefs, and I respect that. Even though I do find it a little funny, so don't see me out and want to punch me in the face or anything. So we're running out of time, Josh. How can people get a copy of your books?
Well, if they would, the best option, in terms of like keeping that small business spirit alive, is to, go to your local bookstore, provided you have one, and ask them to order it. But short of that, you can visit Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and just type in my name, Joshua Cutchin. That's Cutchin, just like a cut on your chin. and that should be the first and only thing that pops up is me and my 3 books. When the first of the 2-volume Bigfoot book comes out, that'll be available on Amazon as well. It's going to be called Where the Footprint Ends: High Strangeness in the Bigfoot Phenomena, Volume 1. But also, I do have a website, joshuacutchin.com. I blog relatively infrequently, but I'm trying to keep it every now and then when I have something that I think is worthy of of expanding on, I'll put that up there at my blog. But also, what I am good about is keeping links to all my books up there, as well as links to every interview that I do. So if you really want to torture yourself and listen to a week's worth of me, that's your one-stop shop.
Well, what's your plans for the rest of 2020? You got any projects or anything that you're working on other than your book?
Well, right now, being a working musician who plays the tuba, we're in the middle of Mardi Gras season, so this is the final push. Yeah, it's been busy. Mardi Gras and Oktoberfest are the 2 times of year that you can always be sure that a tuba player is busy. So we've been a busy February so far, and this weekend is the final push for all that mess. So I'm basically playing nonstop Saturday through Tuesday. So I'll have a big bag of ice at the end of that to slap on my face. I'm as I said, we're finalizing Where the Footprints End, Volume 1. We're working on the layout of that. And like I said, once the layout's finished, I'll put together an index, and then we'll be off to the races. I just started another new project that's going to be a collection of essays that I'm going to be editing. I'm not sure how much I can say about it, but it's the first time I've mentioned it anywhere. So, but that'll be coming out. That'll be coming out hopefully later this year. Exciting little project with something a little bit different, and even though I'm editing the essays for other people, I only have to write one essay, so it's a lot less writing on my end. So that should be coming out later this year. So a couple of different irons in the fire, but right now just trying to power through February.
Oh, I understand. Well, is there any other way people can get a hold of you other than your website, such as Facebook? What's the other ones? I can't even remember.
Yeah, no. I was on Twitter, and UFO Twitter became one of the most toxic places I've been in a long time. Partially because people can't express themselves in such short little snippets, but also, I don't think it was the best place for my personality, and there were also some people who were real knuckleheads on there. So I actually shuttered my Twitter account. I was really happy with how many people had following me, and I sort of had to step away from it. But yeah, you can find me on Facebook. I need to be a little bit better about keeping my author page on Facebook up and running. But you can contact me. I have an author page on Facebook, and you can also I don't think I've reached my friend limit yet. So if you want to, drop me a note and say hi, every now and then I check the messages that get filtered into that other folder. So yeah, just my name, Joshua Cutchin. And there's a contact form on my website as well. But if someone wants to just skip straight to my email inbox, my email was set up around the time that I was collecting stories for my first book, A Trojan Feast. So my email address is foodtaboo. That's FOODTABOO @gmail.com. And that's I have a separate email for everything else that I do. I try to keep all my weird emails in that one account.
I understand that. Well, Joshua, I'm going to have to ask you, if you don't mind, sometime maybe later in the year or whenever you got time, come back on the show and we'll delve deep into some more ancient history or UFOs or Bigfoot or whatever you want to talk about, because I love a good discussion like we had tonight that bounces kind of everywhere.
Well, thanks so much, Rodney, and just let me know. Just give me a heads up, and we'll make it work. Okay.
Well, Joshua, I do appreciate it. You have a good weekend, and don't work your cheeks too hard.
Yeah, I'll try not to. Hey, thanks so much, Rodney. I really appreciate it. Have a nice night.
Well, thank you. You have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, I want to thank Joshua Cutchins, for coming on the show. I have nothing but mad respect for him and the jobs that he's doing. I'm going to try to get him back, either later in the year, maybe next year sometime. It depends on the guest lineup for this year. I'm trying to mix it up. Our next show will be next Thursday night, February 27th. Our special guest will be the first Black Scream Queen. She's an actress, model, pro wrestler, professional cosplayer, the true original Gata, Monique Dupree. So that's going to be a great show. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. Y'all stay safe, be good. I hope y'all enjoyed the show tonight because I did. It was great. I love when you were able to bounce across different spectrums. But like I said, everybody enjoy your weekend and be safe.
That's it for us tonight. I want to thank everyone that took the time to listen in. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Vibe Radio Network and to Ryan for putting up with us. Also to all the first responders and our men and women in the armed services. Thank you for your service and the sacrifices that you and your families make every day to keep our great nation safe. Tune in next week to another exciting show starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everyone can go to our Facebook page Within the Chaos, and don't forget to like our page to see upcoming guests along with past shows, postings, or you can also go to my website at www.blackdiamondps.org or blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. Also, we have a YouTube channel, so go to YouTube, look up Within the Chaos for past shows. Thanks again. Until next week, everyone have a safe weekend and have a good night. And love you all. Be careful out there.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men. cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men, women, and little children. Victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!